Stay tuned for tonight's adventure with the Fat Man.
Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I hope it's good to be where you are, because I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Baltimore Fats, and the game is afoot. Yeah! All right, have fun, guys. Okay, let's see if any of that work will pay off by jumping right in to the famous old tableau, the Jarley Waxworks. How Baltimoreans rang the changes on the idea of living pictures 30 years ago. And again, this is an article I found while looking into Guy Fawkes. And it was published on April 5th, 1908 in the Baltimore Sun, and it was written by one Amy Darcy Wetmore. Now, I'm going into this thinking that she was there. We'll see, I don't know. But she was a semi-regular columnist for the Baltimore Sun in the early 1900s, and a very interesting person in her own right, and who knows, maybe someday she'll get a series all her own, we'll see. But I love how she bylines this article. How Baltimoreans rang the changes on the idea of living pictures 30 years ago. I love it because it implies that people in 1872 had an established idea of what living pictures were. And that idea was undergoing a change. I'm very curious about that, what the perception of living pictures was before this. So let's get moving, right? Amy Darcy Wetmore reports, several weeks ago, I wrote an article telling of old and forgotten entertainments, referring briefly to some beautiful tableau once managed by the late Professor Leonis Rabillon, and to the famous Jarley Waxworks of the late William Prescott Smith, so long prominently connected with the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. I have some notes and also programs of both these affairs, which created much interest at the time of their production. Baltimore, as I have noted before, in the 70s had not the large society it has now, and everybody knew each other. Hence, whoever acted or took part in these merrymakings was most interesting to the audience. Right, so in other words, a group of wealthy, politically connected people, Baltimore high society, who were all friends, threw a twisted masquerade ball open to the public. Right, the audience, whom I'm certain weren't lower class, because the audience found the participants interesting. Right, there's no way the poor in Baltimore gave two craps about these people. Right, but right, so these merrymakings, and I love that, these merrymakings were suggested by Professor Rabillon. Right, just what we need, right? Another professor. And so the statuary tableau, which I will tell of first, were given in the winter of 1870. The ladies had asked Professor Rabillon to give them the benefit of his artistic taste, requesting him to get up something new. He had suggested statuary, saying that it would be the first time this kind of tableau had ever been given here. And now we know this isn't true because we have a Jarley's Waxworks in 1869. In January, no less. So you know they were planning this thing through 1868. Did Professor Rabillon forget? Or was he not there? And who is this? That the ladies, whoever the ladies were, had asked him to give them this party. What could we find out about this Professor Rabillon? Léonce Rabillon was a French sculptor and translator who lived from 1814 to 1886. And I'm calling him Leon from here on out. And I think it's interesting that he was a sculptor, although not surprising, considering the part that sculpting has played in this story, right? So, and there are two of his busts on display at the Peabody in Baltimore. And so we have this John Pendleton Kennedy, an interesting name. And I know he's come up somewhere in the past, right? And this bust is made out of marble and it stands just over 2 feet tall, right? And then we have the man himself, George Peabody. And this is a 19-inch statue in bronze. But his primary occupation, at least in Baltimore, was as professor of French literature at Johns Hopkins. Right? French lecturer at Johns Hopkins. And he's best known for translating Nathaniel Hawthorne's Wonder Book and also the Song of Roland. And so now let's take a quick look at these books, starting with Hawthorne's Wonder Book. A Wonder Book for Girls and Boys, which was published in 1851, is a children's book by American author Nathaniel Hawthorne, in which he retells several Greek myths. So Rabillon translates this book aimed at modernizing Greek myths for children at a time when I'm looking at connecting the major players of the day to the pagan worship of these deities. Now that's very interesting, right? And Hawthorne, he was very clear with his intentions. He writes that he would be substituting a tone in some degree Gothic or Romantic, and any such tone that pleased himself. And he would insert any tone that pleased himself instead of that classic coldness, which he found as repellent as the touch of marble. And now I think this is interesting Because, Rabillon would have been a sculptor, clearly worked in marble. His bust of Kennedy is in marble. And yet he translates this book. Yeah, I think that's kind of funny. And, it says, of course, I shall purge out all the old heathen wickedness and put in a moral wherever practicable. Practicable? I don't know. It's just a weird word. So he's going to make it fun for the children and morally educational when and where he can. Now, I never knew the extent to which Hawthorne was involved in the molding of young minds. But his publisher at this time, this James Thomas Fields, he began reissuing the author's earlier stories for children, which were originally published by Elizabeth Palmer Peabody. Interesting that we have a female publisher of books in the mid-1800s, right? And they were now renamed True Stories from History and Biography. All right, now, you want to talk about your target audience and the idea of installing a false narrative. Right here in the mid-1800s, we have a history book called True Stories. And so now, of course, I didn't go any deeper. I didn't look into what true stories there are in there or anything like that. But, you hand a kid a book, you make him learn what's in that book, and you tell him that it's true, he's going to believe it. That's the way life works. And so this Elizabeth Palmer Peabody, she lived from 1804 to 1894, so she had a nice long life. And she was an American educator who opened the first English language kindergarten in the United States. And this was in 1860. Long before most educators, Peabody embraced the premise that children's play has intrinsic developmental and educational value. Now, I think this is amazing for several reasons, but the first of which is where she's from, right? Elizabeth Palmer Peabody, she spent her early years in Salem, right? Could the person who founded the first English language kindergarten in America have been a witch? I don't know, but I'll bet you dollars to donuts she used one of these, right? You just know she used a willow wand. And the fact that she embraces children's play as having intrinsic development and educational value is amazing because, what else is from Salem? That's right, Parker Brothers is from Salem. And look at this logo, designed by Arnold Ferdinand Arnold. Are you kidding me? How is this possible? I just don't get it. Shall we play a game, right? Let's take a quick look at Parker Brothers really fast, right? And so Parker Brothers was an American toy and game manufacturer, which in 1991, and I love that because it's the same thing backwards and forwards, right? In 1991, it becomes a brand of Hasbro, right? More than 1,800 games, and remember 18 is 3 sixes, right? Were published under the Parker Brothers name since 1883. Right? And here's a brief list of their games, Monopoly. Who hasn't played Monopoly, right? The Ouija board was put out by Parker Brothers in Salem. And of course, the Ouija board has its origins here in Baltimore, right? Clue, Sorry, one of my mother's favorite games growing up. I can't tell you how many games of Sorry I played. Aggravation and Probe. And I'm certainly glad I never played a game called Probe. And so it was founded by this George S. Parker. And so now I think it's interesting the role the name Parker has been playing recently. We now know that Parker is part of the family tree of the Stanleys, right? Or the Dukes of Derby, I think it was, right? I'm not looking that up, going back, right? But just very interesting, right? It says that here that young George S. Parker, when he was 16, he believed that games should be played for enjoyment and did not need to emphasize morals and values. So he creates his first game called Banking in 1883. And so you want to talk about something that doesn't have any morals or values, Banking is it, right? And so he creates this game, and it's a big success among his friends and family. His brother, Charles, right? So we have George and Charles, and think about the way those names figure into this thing, right? So his brother Charles encourages him, and he self-publishes the game, and he's able to make his money back, and he and his brother form this company, the Parker Brothers, and a third brother, Edward. And think about that name in regards to this story, right? They bring him in 1898, and here they are, right? And so I think it's kind of interesting now to see, where Parker Brothers, the game, comes from. We have kindergarten starting out of Salem as well. I don't know, right? And while looking at this, I found this, which I thought was kind of interesting. It says that Parker Brothers marketed their first Jigsaw puzzle in 1887. And now what is anybody who's looking at this type of thing doing but putting together a jigsaw puzzle, right? That's what the Mud City Paradigm Puzzle Tree is, right? And others who are doing this type of work, kind of view it the same way. That's what we have in front of us. What is our hidden past. Is there really anything out there that we can put together a la Jigsaw puzzle form? Or are we all just chasing our tails, And I certainly kind of believe it's the latter, but I happen to like running in circles. All right, so the Jigsaw puzzle was created by this John Spilsbury, and he was a cartographer or a map maker. And this is just how the modern narrative has it going. I'm sure Jigsaw puzzles or something like them have been around for a lot longer than this John Spilsbury, but in terms of the modern, what we think of as Jigsaw puzzles today, it starts with this guy. And being a cartographer, what he did was he would make maps into puzzles, right? And one of his earliest puzzles is this Europe divided into its kingdoms in 1766. And so I wanted to take a closer look at this map, right, and its kingdoms and see how different things were in 1766. But first I wanted to compare it to what Google Earth shows us, right? How the gatekeepers have it. And I just love how the Google Earth image here really reinforces that jigsaw, right? That it's a puzzle, all right? And that they can actually change the puzzle pieces around if they needed to. All right, so I'm not going to go over this map inch by inch or anything, but I did find a few interesting kingdoms. And, I highly recommend that everyone go to the Jigsaw wiki page and download this map and have some fun cruising around. I mean, it's not in English, so that kind of makes things a little difficult, at least for me anyway, but it's just interesting to see how things have changed. And I wanted to share a few thoughts I had when I was cruising around this map. And I'm just going to make one example of this government here. Hey, this is the government of Bielogorod. Bielogorod? I don't know. And strangely enough, those thoughts started with Tartaria because on this map we have Little Tartary. Hey, isn't it cute? Hey, and so essentially what I started to think was, and having seen the names of some of these other governments and kingdoms that were on this map of 1766, just relying on the fact that, like, the word Tartaria or Tartary or something is on these older maps, doesn't necessarily mean, thank you. My phone just agreed with me there. It's been a while since it's done that. Just seeing the name on these maps doesn't necessarily mean it was this realm-wide empire. Somebody could have latched on to Bielgorgorod just as easily as Tartaria, right? And I don't know how the narrative, filters out Bielgorgorod through the ages, but, that's the question I have is, how deep are these guys going with it? Are they just seeing Tartaria on a map and go, look, there it is. Are they looking around and say, well, how many other names on here are not around today? Because there's so many names on here, so many kingdoms and territories and so forth that aren't around today, and how, you have to vet out, how did they get rid of these? You have to do them all. You can't just look at Tartaria, I don't know. That's just, some thoughts I had on it. And again, this isn't to disparage any of the work that anybody else does or anything. It's just questions I have because I don't really pay attention to that anymore, but it does come up, right? Thank you. And so moving on, right? Little Tartary here is what is today. It's the Lower Ukraine. And so here's Little Tartary today. All right, this is what we're looking at in this old map here. It's now part of the southern Ukraine. All right, and on the top, just above the word Tartary here, it says that it's desert plains. Right? It's this Ziki Pole or desert plains. Ziki? I don't know. But so I wanted to see, well, if it's a desert plain in 1766, well, I would think the odds are still pretty good that it would be a desert plain today, right? Deserts don't go away these days, maybe not in 300 years, right? So I wanted to take a look. So let's hit up Google Earth Live real quick. All right, so this is what we're looking at over here. All right, coming down. Now that area was here. It was right next to this sea, right? A little bit. And as I go in, it's certainly, Google Earth isn't telling me this is a desert plain. This is farmland. Zoom in down here. What is this? This looks like a shopping mall. I don't know. Certainly not desert plain, and the way this is laid out, it certainly looks to me like it hasn't been anything that would be considered a desert plain for a long time. Unless this is all an illusion, right? This is just an image of what Little Tartary looks like today in the southern Ukraine. So anyway, I thought that was a lot of fun and, but maybe not as much fun as the idea of board games in kindergarten coming from Salem. But another thing that's really interesting is that Elizabeth Peabody was also a translator. Rabillon wasn't the only one. Right, what are the odds? Rabillon would be a translator. Elizabeth Peabody is a translator. Right, she's the first to translate into English the Lotus Sutra from a French translation in 1844. And so the Lotus Sutra contains the final teaching of the Shakyamuni Buddha, complete and sufficient for salvation. I mean, that's really kind of incredible. Right? And, Nathaniel Hawthorne is also from Salem. That's where the House of Seven Gables is. And so it's really kind of amazing, this sort of hidden role that Salem has played in the history of the development of American education. So now let's get back to Leon and his other notable translation, which was the Song of Roland. And I found this edition of it from 1885, and I love this title page, this happy little owl hanging out here. Henry Holt and Company, 1885, out of New York. And so the Song of Roland is the oldest piece of French literature still in existence. It's an 11th century epic poem based on the tale of Roland in the Battle of Roncesvalles Pass in 788 during the reign of Charlemagne. So it's a Carolingian epic. and so in short, it's the tale of Charlemagne's victory over the Muslims. It's a convoluted tale, but essentially Roland and a small troop are envoy to the Muslim king Marsil to negotiate the peaceful surrender of the Muslims. But they're ambushed by Marsil's men, and a la Tolkien's Boromir, Roland has a horn to blow if things get out of control, and Charlemagne will come running, right? But being proud and ignorant, he waits to blow the horn until the battle is almost lost, right? Everybody in Roland's company is killed. And when Roland does finally get around to blowing this horn, he blows it so hard that his head explodes, right? And in doing so, he earns himself a martyr's death. Charlemagne hears the horn, and the epic ends with Charlemagne disposing of not one but two Muslim kings. And so now even more Muslim ties to Mud City. And you should check out the Song of Roland wiki page. It's a really fantastic story, and there are clues enough in there that the story may be a fraud. But this is what Leon does, right? He sculpts, he translates, and he apparently knows how to throw one hell of a party, right? Because the ladies want him to throw a party, right? And being the sculptor that he is, he suggests a tableau party. Now, the word tableau has been thrown around a lot in this series so far, and I think it's time we take a closer look at the art of tableau vivant. Because that's what we're talking about here. Tableau vivant, French for living picture, right, is a static scene containing one or more actors or models. They are stationary and silent, usually in costume, carefully posed, with props and or scenery, and may be theatrically lit. It thus combines aspects of theater and the visual arts. And on the right here we have a tableau vivant given on May 29th, 1897 in San Francisco. All right, and so that's what people would do. They would pose themselves, and we talked about this with Mrs. Jarley's waxworks. This was called tableau vivant. A tableau may either be performed live or depicted in painting, photography, and sculpture, such as in the many works of the Romantic, Aesthetic, Symbolist, Pre-Raphaelite, and Art Nouveau movements. And here we have an outdoor tableau vivant about gold mining in Paramaribo, 1892. Right, they're just standing around on a stage, and they would drag, it's like the floats, and this is how parade floats got their start, and there were many tableaus that were dragged through the streets of Baltimore during the Jubilee. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, tableaux sometimes featured poses plastiques, flexible poses, by virtually nude models, providing a form of erotic entertainment, both on stage and in print. Theatrical censorship in Britain and the United States forbade actresses to move when nude or semi-nude on stage. So tableau vivant had a place in risque entertainment for many years. Right? That's how they got their freak on. Right? These tableau vivants. And so now you have to imagine this going forward. And so now this is German artist Olga Desmond performing a tableau vivant here. And so now just keep this image in mind going forward when we start looking at Rabillon's tableau party and the Mrs. Jarley's waxworks, right? This is what they were doing. This is what Rabillon proposes to the ladies, right? And it's still alive today. Street performers, this is tableau vivant, right? But the ladies clearly loved this idea. And so I'm going to wrap this one up here, and we'll pick it up with who was there and how, right? And everything else involved in the next captivating episode of Baltimore Fat's House of Wax. Remember, guys, just because you don't know the truth doesn't mean you can't have fun with the lies, right? And so until the next one, cheers.